When comparing my magazine to professional magazines, it is clear that I used some of the typical conventions. For example, a main cell is used to attract the audience, and the model on the front cover is posing violently and wearing violent clothing to connote anger, rebellion, confidence, and dominance, like many of the metal genre magazines. The cover is also simply laid out and not too crowded, so that the main cell can be easily recognised, like the front covers of Metal Hammer. This meant that I decided against the idea of using screamers, which reflects the typical cover of a metal magazine, as they also rely on the featured stories to attract the audience, as opposed to free stuff. The colours I chose to use are also similar to that of typical metal magazines. I used black, red and white for my main colours, as I believe this would keep the layout simple and wouldn't distract the audience from the main cells. By doing this I have kept within the typical conventions of metal magazines, as if we take a closer look at a Metal Hammer cover, we see that these colours are common throughout the magazine. On the inside of my magazine I have used colours such as yellow and green. I did this not only to add more colour to my magazine, but because I realised that Kerrang, which is one of my main influences in creating my magazine, used yellow as a main colour also, which again is a typical convention of the metal genre. When creating my front cover, I also used a skyline to announce the bands featured within my magazine. I did this not only to attract the audience, but because I realised that my influential magazines, such as Kerrang and Metal Hammer, did it also, which keeps into the typical conventions of a metal mag. I also used minor details such as the positioning of the barcode, strap and cover lines on the cover, the use of language, swear words for example, and the price of the magazine, £3.99, which is averagely priced for a metal magazine, especially one that is only published each month. However, genres are not static but shifting and slippery and revolve over time. Because of this, pleasure is derived from repetition and difference. So my magazine also challenges typical conventions of a metal magazine. For example, when creating my magazine, I decided to focus on the metal genre, but including the rock genre within it, to create a hybrid genre magazine. By doing this, I believe I have already developed typical conventions of a metal magazine, as examples of other magazines such as Terrorizer, Revolver, and Metal Hammer only tend to focus on the metal bands, excluding hard rock. I hope that this will add more potential target audience to my magazine, as well as challenging typical conventions. An obvious challenge to typical conventions is that the image on my front cover is taken against a bright red background. This connotes rebellion, which is typical of a metal magazine, but also attracts the audience to my product, if being sold on the shelves, as it would stand out further. The fonts which I used also challenged typical conventions. For example, although mine and professional magazines appear to use serif fonts, professional magazines use bolder and clearer fonts, whereas I use a Kerrang logo style, which I believe is easy to read but attracts the audience also. Also, on the cover, I reversed the typical image behind masthead and made my masthead bleed over the image. I believe that this shows rebellion, which would attract my audience.